Good afternoon, folks. We're live from the Live Living Network. My name's Darren Sheriff. I'm known as the Citrus Guy here in Charleston, South Carolina. We're going to have a little bit of fun today talking about growing food in small spaces. Let me tell you a little bit about kind of a crazy person that you've got here in front of you. Told you my name already. I am a master gardener, emeritus. I put in 10 hours and over 2,500, or 10 years, 2,500 hours. I am the Coastal Carolina president, Coastal Carolina Camellia Society president, founder, former president of the Low Country Fruit Growers Society. I've got 55 varieties of citrus, 220 camellias in my yard, everything in containers because I rent, and we'll get into that in a little bit why. Former active duty Marine Corps, classically trained trombone player, and originally from New Jersey. Do not hold that part against me. So I'd like to remind you, if you do have any questions, please feel free to have your moderator text it in or type it in and text it, and I'll get it here. We'll be able to answer any questions that you happen to have. I think we're supposed to go for like 35, 40 minutes, something along those lines. So we'll probably blow through a lot of things very quickly. This is my 15-hour power. I'm kidding. It's my 2-hour power. I'm kidding again. It is actually 2 hours, but we'll cut it down into 40 minutes. So. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Let me see if I can remember what I need to do here. I will go down to this here and then go over to here. And then we do this. All right. We all locked and loaded. All right, this will be Container Food Gardening 101. Just as a quick side note, if after we're done with all of this, you do have any questions for me, that I can answer later on, my email is thecitrusguy@netzero.net. You can also find me online at thecitrusguy.com. I did also forget to mention that I have written 5 books on different horticulture. If you type in the Citrus Guy into Amazon, pretty much all of my books will come up. So, all right, we'll go ahead and get started on this. What's considered a small space? Basically, what it sounds like. Part in the balcony. Maybe you live in a mobile home park, which is what I do, believe it or not. You got a patio or a deck. Maybe your yard is taken up by a pool. You've got very close neighbors. There's a neighborhood here in Charleston that if you sneeze, the people 2 doors down from you can hear you. So anything along those lines. One of the big things is what you can use for a container. Anything that will hold soil and has drainage is basically on the board. All right, as you can see in this picture, I used a bathtub. We had our bathtub replaced, and I hated just throwing it into the landfill. So I got thinking about it, fill it with some soil. It's already got drainage. You got the drain hole and everything. So I was growing asparagus in it. It's working wonderfully. Things that you need to remember is if it can be placed in the sun, there's some containers that will dehydrate and dry out in the sun, so you don't want to use those. Definitely need something that's not going to fall apart within the first growing season, i.e. don't use a cardboard box. Okay, it just doesn't work. Also has enough room for the mature plant. All right, and you'll see some very interesting ways that I did with some of this stuff. You don't want to be trying to grow a tree in a 1-gallon pot. It just kind of makes sense. Oops. Sorry, went too far. This is just kind of a picture that I found one time on the internet of different things that can be used. Most of these Rubbermaid containers will last maybe 2 years, but then they'll start to dry rot. You also got to make sure that you do poke holes into the bottom for the drainage. If you have somebody that's in the shipping business, anything like these boxes, most of them that are made out of cedar will last for years. Be careful of what some of them are made out of. If it's made with wood that's been treated with chemicals, you probably don't want to use that for food. All right. This was just a cute picture that I found. You definitely don't want to use these for any type of food because the chemicals in the tires would probably leach into the soil, but it was a neat recycling thing. You can use old PVC pipe, old water tubing pipe for things. Again, I know these aren't necessarily food, but it'll give you an idea of what you can use. I just thought that was pretty if you want to do something neat for your yard. For all the ladies out there, I'm sure that y'all probably have a few of these laying around the house somewhere. You can use them, just don't tell your husband. Don't worry if there's any guys in the audience, I got you covered too, okay? So anyway, this is something that I've got growing in my yard. It's definitely been in the pot for too long. You can see that the root has completely blown out through the bottom, and that can be a problem. This tree is actually about 20 feet tall right now, so, and it was only a 15-gallon pot. All right, what can be grown in a container? If it can grow, it can be grown in a container. Herbs, vegetables, fruit, flowers. Like I said, if you can plant a seed, you can probably grow that. We'll run through some of the herbs that I've done over the years. That's some oregano that I've got grown in a pot. Nice and full. You can keep it close to your kitchen. We'll talk about all the sun and all that type of stuff in a few minutes, but if it's close to your back door, you're definitely going to use it more often. Chives. You can see the strawberries in the background on that. This is Cuban oregano. Not as flavorful as regular oregano, but it does add a nice little flavor to it. Then you can do vegetables. These are some tomatoes and peppers that I had done one year. Those are 15-gallon pots. If you've ever seen landscapers out in the yard planting trees or whatever, those are the pots that they use for trees. These are some beans that I was playing around with one year. You can also see that I do grow things in the ground. I like it in containers, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes yet. That's another view of the different beans and things. Remember that those pots at the very end? That's something that's going to come up again later on. Some red beans, some red string beans. I was growing them up different types of trellises to see how well they would work. For those of you up north, you probably have no idea what that is. This is actually red okra. Those of you that have moved from the south up north know what okra is. I'm originally from Jersey. I don't like okra, but I can eat the red okra. It's actually a little bit sweeter and a little bit softer. And especially as long as it's fried, you can eat anything fried. Bell peppers. They don't do as well down here because of our heat, but up north they would do phenomenal. For the folks down in Florida, I'm not sure how well y'all would do down there, but it doesn't hurt to try. Remember I told you to keep those pictures in mind at the end of that row? It was corn. You can actually grow corn in containers. I've got 5 or 6 stalks in each of those pots so that they'll cross-pollinate. We had enough corn to last us months. The wife and I don't eat a lot of corn, but we did have some. Of course, you can do onions. That's nice and easy. Swiss chard. You know, like I said, you can grow pretty much anything. If you can grow it, it'll grow. I know I don't have a lot of be able to get back and forth with you. If anybody can figure out what that plant is right off the bat, you get an extra cookie. All right, I'll give you a few extra seconds to think about it. And the answer is, those are potatoes. I was growing potatoes in containers. What you do with that is you cut up the potatoes so that there's little eyes. You know, those of you that have ever grown potatoes know that you have to have an eye. You fill the bottom of the soil with a little bit of soil. You put the eyes on top of that. Once they sprout, cup 2-3 inches, you put more dirt on it to the bottoms of the leaves. You just keep doing that till the pot is completely full with the soil. Let the plants flower and do their thing. That all came out of one 15-gallon pot right there. Not the cucumbers and stuff. That was something different. But those potatoes are one pot. All right. Of course, you can grow fruit. I'm known as the citrus guy, so fruit is, of course, my specialty. And yes, what you are looking at is papaya, grown here in Charleston. I grew that from seed. There's also figs there to the left of the picture. I've tried to grow these type of blackberries in Charleston in a container. They do not do very well here. They might do better up north, I don't know, but anyway. Of course, citrus, that is a immature Meyer lemon there. You can grow blueberries. Blueberries do very well in containers. You just keep them pruned back. There's another one of my fig trees. You can see the figs all over them. These are my brambles. These are blackberries, raspberries, marionberries, boysenberries, stuff like that. I was trying different types of different types of trellises. The teepee one seems to work the best. Those are basically 1x2s. Or 1x1, something along those lines. You just turn them into a teepee, tie them up at the top, let the plants grow straight up them. There's a closer picture of some of the raspberries. You can see how well they were actually doing. And of course, my boysenberries. Love boysenberries. Another picture of the boysenberries. Grapes. Here in Charleston, you can grow grapes. These were actually Concord grapes. We've got a problem here called Pierce disease. It'll take the grapes out in about 3 or 4 years. You can either just, replant them or plant something else. I ended up having these die on me, and then I planted muscadines. My strawberry barrel, this barrel here is actually a prototype. The very first one I did, there was a lot of problems with it. The holes were too far apart, the holes were too big, and there wasn't enough of them. But other than that, it worked fine. Once I realized what I was doing wrong, you make the holes about 1.5 inches, maybe 3/4 of an inch, something along those lines. Have them closer together and alternated, and you can have more strawberries and you'll know what to do with. I've even grown pineapple. I'm on my 3rd generation of pineapple. I planted the top from a grocery store pineapple. It fruited, cut the top off of that, planted it, it grew, it fruited. I've just planted that 3rd top recently. All right, some of the other reasons to grow in containers. Like we said, small space. How many of y'all like to rearrange yards? Or rearrange your furniture? In a container, it's so much easier to rearrange your yard. That way too, if you've got a plant that's getting too much sun, not enough sun, it's in a corner somewhere where you're missing watering, fertilizing, whatever, you can move it to where it's easier. You can, if you rent, which is another one of my issues, sun availability. If you've got that patio that I was telling you about, you can't grow things in concrete. Trust me, I've tried. But if you've got a container, you can do that. Multiple crops, it's so much easier to just pull the dead plants out, pour that dirt out, put some new dirt in. You don't have to do any digging or anything. Or depending on what the crop is, you can even reuse that soil. Also, if you've got a longer season, I know up north y'all are probably cold. We're probably like 80 degrees today. Sorry. But if you've got a freeze coming and you want to try to protect it a little bit longer, it's much easier to move a pot. Okay? These are some fall planting dates for here in Charleston. Ignore this. We're not going to help you guys much up there. Florida, it's probably even a little later than this. And the same thing with the spring dates. All right, how to get started. One of the first questions I always get asked is, what should I plant? Well, I usually counter with a question of, what do you like to eat? All right. Those pictures in the catalogs, they look fantastic. Yes, you might want to grow chartreuse rhubarb or whatever it is. Does anybody in the family eat chartreuse rhubarb? If they don't, then it's probably not worth planting it. So plant what you like to eat. All right, make a list of your family's favorite vegetables, then go through the catalogs. Also, you want to try to figure out how you want to use your produce. I was doing a lecture a few weeks ago, and the people were just cutting and throwing away their basil. I said, why? They said, well, we don't use that much of it. I said, well, why weren't you dehydrating it or freezing it? They never even gave it a thought. So you can very easily save your produce from year to year. Quick, cute thing that I found one time, and this really works good down here, it might even work up north more, is if you want to dehydrate your herbs, put them in a brown paper bag and then put them in the trunk of your car. Not only will the heat of the car dehydrate them, the bag will wick the moisture out. You've got yourself a free air freshener. So if you like to ride around smelling like basil all day, hey, go for it. And of course, your last thing is going to be how much space you have available. If you've got a family of 15 people, you're probably going to need a little bit more space than just the wife and I. All right? Just getting that out there. All right. You definitely want to think ahead. I know for a fact up north that a lot of places do not sell seeds all year round. You know, they've got them out in the spring, and then once they're sold out, you don't see them anymore. Here in Charleston, they've gotten better about it. You actually can buy seeds throughout the year. And of course, with the internet, you can always do it a little bit more too. But if you don't like buying things online, stock up there in the spring. Just because you buy them in the spring doesn't mean that you can't plant them in the fall. All right, pick up a few extra cool season crops. Your lettuce that you plant in the spring and early summer, you can plant that again in the fall and the winter. You know, you can't get the seeds then, but you can still plant them. I like to start a lot of my seeds indoors. This is one of the ways that I do it with the seed containers that you can get at any of the big box stores or garden centers. I put the lights on timers, so I don't have to worry about those. You can also use Coke bottles or Pepsi bottles or any type of soda bottle. Basically what you do is you take the label off of it, cut it 3/4 of the way around, about halfway down, so that you've got a little hinge, fill it with your soil, put your seed in there, put the hinge back up, wrap a piece of duct tape around it, and then just put it under some light. If you need to water it, you just unscrew the cap and sprinkle some water in there. It's a great recycling job. All right, one of the next biggest question I get is potting mix. Use whatever type of potting mix you can get. The 3 things that you need to remember the most of is A, is it free draining? It's got to be able to drain water from it. So you can't use straight peat moss. 2, you want to make sure that it will retain some moisture, because the seeds and plants do need some moisture. So you can't use straight sand. The 3rd thing to remember is it's got to be sturdy enough to support the plant. So you can't use straight perlite. However, use all 3 of those, you're golden. All right. This is just a little recipe that I put together one time. I'll use an example of the 220 some odd camellias that I've probably got 185 different soil mixtures. But as long as you've got those 3 components that I told you about, use whatever you've got. And yes, I do reuse soil from different crops. My camellia soil, if I actually have camellia dye, I may use that for my tomatoes next year. Or once I'm done with the tomatoes, I may use that for the corn. You want to rotate your crops so that you don't have disease and pest problems. And when it comes to the different, 2 parts compost, 2 to 4 parts, this isn't rocket surgery. As long as you remember those 3 things that I told you about, use whatever you've got. All right? When it comes to planting seeds, think about how nature would plant them. All right? When a fruit is forming, that's the seed pod. It'll fall to the ground, it'll deteriorate, dry up and everything, and the seeds will start growing right where they are. They don't have anybody out there planting them 1/4 inch deep and all that other type of stuff. Very small seeds, I'll sprinkle them on the ground and then just tap them down. Medium-sized seeds, you want to plant them about their own width deep. So if they're a half inch wide, plant them about a 1/2 inch deep. Larger seeds like avocados, things like that, you want to plant them so that the tips of the seed are just sticking above the ground. One of the biggest things from this screen I want you to remember is that last sentence. Do not let the seed bed dry out. As soon as it dries out, those seeds are gone. Just as a little quick trivia note for you, if you've ever read the back of a seed packet, it always tells you to plant them 2 inches apart by 1 foot wide. If you've never really thought about that, why? Because in the old, ancient times or whatever, when they were pulling the carts through with the horses, they needed room in between the crops for the wheels. Doesn't make any sense why you can plant them 2 inches apart this way and not 2 inches apart this way, now does it? Just a little trivia for you. All right, water. Remember in containers that they will dry out much faster than their in-ground counterparts. A lot of it's going to depend on your container. A plastic container will not dry out as fast as a terracotta pot. If you've got more peat moss in it, it's going to dry out a little bit faster than, I'm sorry. If it's got more sand in it, it's going to dry out a little bit faster if it's got more peat moss in it. So it's going to depend on your pot type, your soil type, your crop. Lettuce is not going to use as much water as corn. Okay? And of course, your weather. If you're running 90 degrees and you haven't seen rain in weeks, it's probably going to dry out a little faster than if you're getting rain every other day. Black containers can keep a lot of heat. You see a lot of the black containers, you saw a lot of them in some of my pictures. The root zone can easily reach 120 degrees in full sun. All right, that's definitely not good for the root zone. You can get yourself some of that Krylon spray paint. Spray paint your pot white or any other pretty color if you want, like blue or whatever, just to reflect the light. Okay. All right, the majority of food-producing plants need a minimum of 7 hours of sun. That's just nature. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Yeah, you're probably going to get a few, I can grow, carrots in 5 hours. Or there's always going to be moderations. if you keep 7 hours in mind, you're good to go. Remember, early afternoon is better than, or early morning to early afternoon is better than late afternoon, especially down here in the south. May not be quite as critical up north. About 2 o'clock or so, the sun here is brutal. I mentioned about painting your pots and using light colored pots. When it comes to fertilizing, if you feed it, it'll feed you. On your annuals, you want to probably go ahead and use your water-soluble types, i.e. Miracle Grow for acid-loving plants. I miss the old Moracid, one word, it was easy. But like your tomatoes, your lettuce, corn, use the water-soluble. On your more perennial or shrubs and stuff like that, I use a combination of things. You can use the slow release, or you can use and/or water-soluble. I'll use Osmocote as a slow drip release. I like the products put out by Espoma best, Polytone, things like that, especially for your acid-loving plants. Also remember that nitrogen, that first number on your bag, will leach out faster than any of the others. Nitrogen moves through the soil quicker than your phosphorus and potassium. And if you can never remember the order, remember it's alphabetical: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. All right. This also brings up, I'm not a real big fan of fertilizer spikes, for the simple fact of you stick them in the ground, you're good to go, right? Yeah. The nitrogen, like I said, leaches through the soil very quickly. It also moves through the soil quickly. Phosphorus and potassium do not. So if you stuck this fertilizer blob into the ground or into your container, it's just going to sit there. So when the plant's roots start looking for fertilizer and it finds this bulge, yeah, I'll spit it out eventually, of fertilizer, it's going to burn the roots. All right, so that's why I'm not a real big fan of the spikes. All right, when it comes to pests, of course, you're going to have pretty much the same thing as your in-ground counterparts. You want to hand-pick them and destroy as many of the bigger ones as you can. Grasshoppers, things like that. Insecticidal soap will be one of your best friends. If you've got a soft-bodied pest, i.e. aphids, whitefly, some of your soft-bodied scale. For your caterpillars, you want to use BT. I'm not going to try to pronounce that word. I'm sure there's many of you out there that can. I am not going to try it. Make sure when you're spraying your pesticide that you use adequate coverage on the upper and lower leaf surfaces, especially the lower. That's where the bugs love to hide. Make sure the insecticide you're using is good for the crop and the pest that it's being used on. All right, so make sure that you read your labels. Make sure the label is the law. All right, a few pests that you may see, especially around here. I know you've probably got a lot of them up there. Your Japanese beetle. Birds are always going to be an issue. When it comes to the birds, and this is something that I tell a lot of people, just for the simple fact, don't use old CDs. You know, people hang the old CDs on a string and so that the light reflects and scares them. Now, unless you're using a Justin Bieber CD, that one will scare just about anything away. But other than that, no. Birds will get used to it eventually. Leaf miners, spider mites, mealybugs, all those type of things. A few more that you'll see. Again, being the citrus guy, the orange dog caterpillar is a big nemesis of mine. He literally looks like bird poop. Okay. I think we're doing okay on time here. All right, good. Aphids, again, that's one of your soft body. There's another one of your caterpillars, the tobacco hornworm, and your grasshopper. All right, there's the bird poop one that I was just telling you about. Pretty ugly guy, isn't he? He will defoliate a citrus tree in no time flat. I know my friends down in Florida are probably saying, yeah, oh yeah, we know about this guy. Well, the biggest problem that you've got is that's what it turns into. So now what do? Do you want to save your crop or do you want to save the butterflies? In my world, the crop always wins. All right, of course, some diseases that you'll probably end up having to worry about. Some of the main ones, just make sure that your fungicide is approved for the crop and the disease. Again, just like your other pesticides. Neem oil is definitely going to be one of your best friends. It's got horticultural, or it's got the pesticidal properties. It's got fungicidal properties. It's organic. It's great stuff. Your good horticultural practices will also help you with the diseases. Make sure that you clean up any of your fallen leaves, fallen fruit that's just fallen off for whatever reason. Keep your plants well pruned, well watered. Good air spacing is critical. The best example that I've used for when it comes to a lot of crops is there was a gentleman here in the South. His name was Hewlin Smith, and he was one of the greatest camellia growers that you've ever wanted to know. He would prune his camellias so that you could throw a dead cat through it. All right, I'll let you all visualize that for a second. It was more for the airflow and so that he could get into the disease, into pests and diseases easier. All right, sanitation I mentioned is critical. Make sure that when you've got an issue like city mold, that you get rid of the underlying problem first. All right, you can use neem oil on the city mold, but it's probably either aphids or whiteflies that are causing it. So you want to get rid of those first. Okay. Here's a few diseases that you might run into, at least here in the South. I was telling you about the Pierce disease. Fire blight is a major problem with pear trees. It's one of the reasons why we can't grow pears very well here. Anthracnose on the strawberries. I know the folks down in Florida just went, yeah. Mummy berry on your blueberries and things like that. Powdery mildew, I'm sure we've got all over the country. Late blight is a problem that had reared its ugly head a few years ago, really bad down here. Fusarium wilt. Y'all probably know most of the diseases. It's just a matter of identifying it and trying to catch it before it gets to be too terribly bad. This is some of my citrus trees that I've got growing in containers. One of the books that I wrote is called How to Grow Citrus Practically Anywhere. It deals exclusively with growing citrus trees in containers, even for folks up north. I've actually sold some to some folks up in Canada that will grow them indoors during the wintertime, bring them back outside during the spring and summer. They can handle colder weather than a lot of people think. There's a little bit better shot at a different barrel that I got going. This one was a little bit better. It still wasn't great. The holes still could have been a little closer together, so I could have gotten even more plants in there. You can get these barrels at any like major landscaper that does a lot of like liquid iron, things like that. Car washes used to have a lot of this type of stuff. The soap was fine. It's not a problem. You just don't want to use anything that was a harsh chemical. Okay. Pomegranates can be grown in containers. You can see these are some of mine that are flowering. I get a bunch of fruit off of them. Up north, they may not be doing as well, but again, you can also grow those indoors during the winter time. This is my Asian pear and my peach tree. Asian pears will do better here. Your Bartletts and things like that, not quite as much. All right, there's a little bit closer up of one of my fig trees. Believe it or not, this fig is about 10 years old. I keep it trimmed way low just so it's easier for me to get to the fruit, as long as the possums don't get to it first. And then that's kind of an overall view of my yard 1 year. I mentioned earlier about growing them in containers. It's easy to replace them, switch things around. My yard never looks the same 2 years in a row. So this was probably 2-3 years ago. It looks completely different now. Remember I told you that I had swapped out the Concord grapes for the Muscadine grapes. As you can see, they're growing in a container. They're growing on the fence. This is what it looks like from behind. This is what I can see out my front window. This is what it looks like from the road. Kind of cool, huh? Makes a great natural fence. And then that was a friend of mine that came walking through my yard one day. I was out watering the plants. I thought there was a dog or a cat coming up behind me. And no, it wasn't. It was this little 3.5, 4 foot alligator. I talked to it. It talked to me. I took a picture of it. It hissed at me and walked away. So, all right, there's my email. If you've got any questions, citrusguy@netzero.com. It also works at netzero.net. I've got both of those. So if you've got any questions, feel free to go ahead and type those in. I'll bring myself back up a little bit here. There we go. Whoops, try not to disappear too much on the screen. So hopefully we've got a few questions. I'll do a little song and dance while we're waiting. Yes.
We have a question about using pesticides and still being organic. What are organic pesticide options?
It's going to depend on of course, your pests and everything. Oh,
Yeah.
the question is what would be a good organic pesticide? Especially being that you're going to be eating this too, you want something that's going to be organic. Things like the neem oil is probably going to be your best bet. Neem can be used on just about every type of insect. Your aphids, your spider mites, your whitefly. The problem with neem oil is, as with any other horticultural oil, you don't want to spray it if the temperature is going to be over 75 degrees. All right, you'll basically turn your plant into a little crispy critter. Other pesticides that you can use, the insecticidal soap. Basically what that is exactly what it sounds like, is soap. It dries the bug out to death. If you've ever, taken a shower or bathed or whatever and didn't get all the soap off your hand or off your arm or whatever, in a little while it starts itching really bad, that's what it does to the insect. It literally dries it out. Those would be your two best. Malathion is labeled for pests or for food products and stuff. Not a big fan of it, but I will pull it out if the bugs have gotten real bad. I hope that answered that question.
We've got another question about the material of the container. Does that change the way that the plant grows at all?
Does the material of the plant change the way the plant itself grows? Not necessarily. The only difference that you would see would be like I mentioned earlier with the water. If you've got a terracotta pot, the plant or the soil ball is going to dry out much faster than if it's a plastic pot. It really doesn't change anything. I will throw one more other thing in here. If you do use a lot of peat in your soil mix, be very careful when you're watering it. A lot of people will water a plant so that when they see water coming out of the bottom, they know that it's been watered well. Not necessarily. Peat will cause soil to become aquaphobic. If it is dried out too much, it will not absorb the water back again. So you'll be watering the plant, water's coming out of the pot right away. What's happening is it's running in between the soil ball and the side of the container. All right, so make sure that you can probably pick your container up or tip it a little bit to see if it's still damp. You want to try to keep everything about the consistency of a wrung out dish sponge. If nothing else, stick your finger into the soil and you'll be able to tell if it's damp or not.
Another question about moving plants. Is there any considerations to moving plants using a vehicle inside? Is there a truck or a closed vehicle?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question.
Sounds like they're asking about, should you move plants inside like a van or a truck?
Oh, yeah, okay. If you're asking about moving plants like inside a van or a truck, it's probably going to still get kind of cold out there. I guess it could be done if it's only going to be a couple degrees that you're trying to protect it. Usually what I'll tell people to do is bring it like inside an unheated garage will even work better. Or if you've got a sunroom or something along those lines, even the garage, you can run like a small space heater and keep it a few degrees warmer than in there. Container or a vehicle, I just don't think it's going to stay warm enough.
Got another couple good questions here. Do you ever have to replant into larger containers for trees as they grow?
Yes, the repotting, yes. Question is, do you have to repot trees and things as they grow bigger? There's two theories of thought on this. One, you can go from smaller pot to a bigger pot to a bigger pot to a bigger pot, or you can go from a smaller pot to a bigger pot, whichever. You can do it that way, or you can do what's called a root pruning. Basically, if you've got a size pot that you're comfortable with, and I'll use a 15-gallon pot as an example, it gets to be too big. I can tell when a plant needs to be repotted because the wind keeps blowing it over. Sounds silly, but it works. What you do is you take it out of that pot, you prune about a third of the roots off. Make sure you also prune a third of the canopy, because what's happened is now that you've taken all the roots off of there, it's not going to be able to support the top part of the plant. And then you can repot into that same pot with new fresh soil. You're good for another 2 or 3 years. Okay?
This question is, does the fruit change size based on the size of the container?
No. Your plant might change size. All of my citrus are normal size. All right. The only thing that it might dwarf will be the plant to some degree. If you're using a big enough pot, it's not really going to matter. But no, that does not change the size of the fruit or the vegetable of any sort. Any more questions out there? If not, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Again, I am the Citrus Guy at at netzero.com. If you've got any questions, you can also go to the citrusguy.com, check out my website. You can find out my books on Amazon, and I hope you all have enjoyed it.